ahead and get started because I know for some it's a long weekend, so want to make sure we just get this going right away. So welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn. So we'll go through the things that have been launched in TransIT since our February Lunch and Learn, since we did not have one for March. Okay, so the agenda for today then is enhancements since our February's virtual user group. I'm going to focus on interface transactions and how to use them effectively in your workflows and scenarios for testing purposes. And then we'll go through a tip of the month. So looking at the new features that were launched in TransIT since February, and all of this information for everyone who doesn't know is listed in under reports in our release notes. And so every time we have a new release go out, we add to the release notes so everybody can see what functionality or what fixes went in during that release. So the first new feature is we launched the first release of notifications that will go to users during testing rather than receiving text or email. So it will be an option. So I will say that at this point in time, I'm only mentioning it because it was listed in our release notes, but we just have the first kind of piece that's been released. And so it's not something that I'm going to show because it's not really ready for people to start using it right now. So as soon as it is ready, we'll of course feature it in a future Lunch and Learn so everybody has a good understanding of how they can make use of that so they can get pop-up notifications during testing when they're up for a round of testing or when something's assigned to them rather than receiving text or email. Or if you prefer text or email, you can continue to use text or email. It's just going to be another option that's available to you. So the next thing that was added is we added a requested date inside our new issue log, or sorry, our new, when you're logging a new issue. So that can just help you to track your issues and make sure that there's a requested date noted when you're planning on when issues are being completed. The next is accessing a scenario from the test dashboard now opens in a new tab. So if you're using filter functionality on your dashboard, this is helpful because it maintains your filtered functionality on the dashboard, opens the test script in a additional tab, and then you can just close out of that tab and you're right back to your filtered dashboard. And the last thing that was added is that the toggle that is available to show, so either turn on or turn off scenario header details inside a scenario has now been extended to our interfaces. So in previous functionality, it was only showing header functionality with the toggle within the actions and outcomes. And so now that's been added to interfaces as well. So I'm going to jump over to TransIT in just a second. So under the interface transaction settings, what we're going to be looking at is adding interface transactions to your workflows, including details within those transactions. And then that way, this information will pull into your scenario every time that you add that scenario to, sorry, every time you add that workflow to a scenario. Then also how to add individual transactions to a scenario as you need to. And then how you can track the interface transactions from your interface dashboard. And then also review how you can review all your transactions and track for exceptions. So I'm going to jump over to TransIT now. And so here I have a workflow opened. This is just the workflow for if you're registering a patient that doesn't have a pre-reg completed for them. And so in this case, at the end of the registration, when you've clicked OK, you should anticipate to receive an ADT AO4. So if I know that every time I'm using this workflow, that when I click OK, we're going to receive an ADT AO4, then I might as well add that interface transaction to my workflow. And so in order to do that, I can right click on my last step here, and I can select Add Interface. And so when I do that, it opens this add interface window, which allows me to search for the interfaces that I want to add. And so I can use either the search or I can use filter information here to help me narrow down to which transactions I want to add. So I said I know I'm going to add an AO4, so I can just select AO4 from this filter here. And I can see that these are all of the AO4s that are created for my organization. So I know that this workflow is a Cerner workflow, so I'm going to turn on both of these AO4s here, and then I'm going to click Save. And when I do that, you can see that they were added to the interfaces column here, and that they have a details field here. So we would recommend that you always complete at least some details when you're adding your interfaces, and we would recommend adding the patient name. Oops. And possibly, let's say, the Amarin. We'll just do those for now. And I'm going to highlight these, save it here, and I'm going to add it to my other interface here. And so now I know that anytime I use this workflow 861, it's going to add all of my steps with all the details, and it's also going to pull in this interface. And this just saves you time so that you don't have to add it individually each time you're using the workflow within a scenario. So if I want to go over to my scenario now, and I go here, and I search on 861, because that's the workflow I was on over there, I can select my workflow here and click Next. Going to add it as expected. I know because I was just in the workflow that the reg clerk is selected as the position. And so for that reason, I don't need to select my position from the drop-down list here, and I can click Save. And so when I do that, you can see that when I scroll to the bottom here, it's added the interfaces for me, plus it's pulled in the details that I had typed into the details fields there. And so as I had mentioned, we have our toggle on and off to show header details. So when I click that, so what was already functioning was that it was pulling that information into our actions and outcomes. And now it's also pulling that information into our interfaces. So it was always working if you were pulling into a test round. It just wasn't working with the toggle on and off for the scenario steps. So now it is working. So let's say I realize from a scenario perspective that I want to add another interface, but it didn't make sense for me to add it to my workflow because it's not one that happens very often, but I know in this particular case that it does need to be added. I can also add an interface specifically to a scenario. So if I want to do that, it's the exact same way that I just did it from within workflows. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to add interface. So we've added some generic interface transactions because we received feedback from some of our clients that not everybody is tracking to this degree of detail, and they just wanted the ability to add generic ADTs or add generic ORMs to their scenario. So we created those inside TransIT as well. So if I go to my filter here and select from the dropdown, so you can see that there's the more specific AO1, AO2, but then there's also just this ADT here. So if I select that here, I can see that there's one that's created. You can see the description says that it's generic ADT. So it's not specific to any particular number. It can be used and you can provide the specific details within the details field. So I'm going to select this ADT here and I'm going to click save. And then you can see that it was added to my scenario here. So if you're wanting to make use of the interface dashboard and tracking your interfaces, you can add them to workflows that then pull into your scenarios and pulls in all the information that you added. Or if you just need to add them individually to a scenario, you can do it either way. And so I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna copy and paste that information here. And then we can look at it from a interface dashboard perspective. Sorry. I had this open because I mentioned in the first slide that we added the requested date. So in a new issue, when you're logging it, there's this requested date. So you can enter a requested date as needed. And as you can see by default, it's defaulting in blank. So you can either use that field or not. It's completely up to you whether or not you decide to use that field. So now I'm going to look at the interface dashboard. So when using the interface dashboard here, it's important to note what the status of the step is in order for your interface analyst to know whether or not they should be able to see if they've received these transactions or not. So anywhere that you see pass in this column here, you know that it means that the step that's associated to the interface has been executed from the step perspective. So then you had the option to go and execute to say whether or not the interface was in fact received as it should have been. So just like on the regular test steps, you have the pass button here, or you have the option to select a different option from the drop-down list. And you can also do the multi-select here and execute multiple, just like under our steps. But you can also see here that I've got one here that's showing flagged. If I look at the notes here, I can see couldn't complete discharge. And so your interface analyst can see, okay, I shouldn't be looking for this AO3 for this particular patient because we weren't able to complete the discharge, which means the transaction wasn't actually sent. And so that's how you can use the dashboard to track your interfaces. And so, maybe there's going to be only specific interface transactions that you care about looking at, or maybe if a tester comes to you and wants to confirm a particular interface, you can use this dashboard to see whether or not the interface was received. And so let's say you know that there wasn't one received and you want to come to the dashboard here, you can filter and only look at the ones that were flagged, because obviously if the step was flagged, you know that you shouldn't be expecting to receive that interface because it wasn't executed. So I'm going to go back to the steps here. So I mentioned how when you click on a scenario, it's going to open in an additional tab now. So let's say I want to filter my dashboard to only be looking at the scenarios that are for the Cerner facility. I can select that from the drop-down list here, and it's filtered my dashboard to only show those scenarios. So then when I click to open the steps for one of my scenarios, you can see that it opened in an additional tab here, and I can go ahead and I can execute my steps as needed. And then when I'm finished, I just exit out here. So rather than clicking the dashboard icon, I can exit out here, which closes that tab, and I'm returned to my test dashboard, and then still has the same filters on for me. So it just helps to save some time there. So now I'm going to go to our tip of the month. So our tip of the month is that we recommend avoiding using special characters. So especially when it comes to
And you cut out. Okay, so Angela's internet just went out, so we're almost at the end here. So I'll carry on with this last slide. I won't be able to move the slides forward. So the reason we recommend that you not use special characters in naming tasks and positions is because if you use a special character in the task name and you go to right click that task from a scenario to edit it, it just doesn't work. So we know that in the text of a task, you might sometimes want to put an apostrophe or use a different special character, but other special characters are also reserved in HTML and just don't work. So examples of that would be if you're uploading a script that somebody else had sent you, how we use the square brackets, patient name, square bracket. A lot of vendors will put a less than symbol, patient name, greater than symbol, but in HTML, those symbols mean to omit what's ever between those two characters. So the long and the short is we just recommend you limit the use of special characters, especially when it comes to position names and task names. And the reason for eliminating it in position names is because obviously if you're doing a cut and paste to clipboard to create a scenario, the way it creates the task names is it takes the position name. So if the position name has a special character, and the example would be like women's health, so we would avoid using the apostrophe S and just put the S in there. And I think that was basically it for today, unless anybody has any questions of any kind. Okay, if not, thank you very much, everyone. And good thing we were on the last slide when her internet cut out. Have a great day. Happy Easter, everybody.